The Cell to Systems podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening does not create a doctor-patient relationship. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider regarding your medical conditions or before changing your health regimen. Do not disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on the podcast. Reliance on the information provided is at your own risk. Guest opinions are their own. Cell to Systems may utilize affiliate links, feature sponsored content, or discuss companies in which hosts or guests have financial or advisory interests. Relevant disclosures will be noted during the episode or below.
All right. In this episode of Cell to Systems, we're going to be talking about the optimization or longevity dashboard that we patients tend to bring to our providers, or we're obsessed with tracking. And then for providers, how do you deal with those patients who are doing just that? I think it's really interesting. You take a look at, I'm tracking stuff on my Apple Watch all the time. And then we have people who are looking at stuff on Oura Rings and Whoop and this and that, and then Function Health, where, we get so many markers that, people say, well, what do I do with all of this? And is it actually really helpful when you take that to your provider? So today we have the benefit of talking to people who are actually working with that every single day. And then we also get to talk to Leonard and Frank, who are doing something really interesting with NUHX, which I think is going to become sort of a next level piece of the puzzle in where we are. So there's lab overload for sure. That became clear when we looked at what Dr. Abid Hussain, who is a cardiologist in longevity medicine. And in his talk, he talked about wanting ApoB, RDW, MCV, total cholesterol HDL ratio, and neutrophilic lymphocytes ratio. So it was like, hey, I only want these particular things to tell me what I'm looking for. When somebody comes in with these other tests, as I recall, what he said was, it's like, there's just way too much information. So how do we maximize the labs that we're getting? So I want to start off with you, Suzanne, and just ask you, when you're looking at labs, when you have a patient who's coming in, where do you start?
So that's a great question. I just saw a patient today that's very much this exact issue. So this patient she owns an international skincare line, and she brings in her Oura Ring, which I thought was going to be a great idea. So this is where we have to be really careful with selection of client, correct? And I think she's kind of a metrics person. She's into marketing. Her business is actually marketing, but when I give her this and she comes back to me with the results, now she's not sleeping because she's panicked about what her Oura Ring says that she's not sleeping, right? So we have to realize that all of these things that we do to monitor our people are it's a measure, typically a measure of a second in time. It is an optimization tool. This is not a scorecard. Like, what is your HRV? Oh, what is my HRV? This is what I hear all the time. I'm sure you guys are all nodding your heads that our clients are doing this. And so I also start out every conversation by saying, let me just tell you, in this panel, which is about 25 labs that I typically draw in my annual kind of where are we today exam. And in that lab, one of the things we look at is a glucose, for example. I know that there was a study done back in 2004. Maybe it was 14, where they demonstrated that a glucose for every point above 87 that your blood sugar goes, your risk of developing diabetes in the next 10 years goes up by 6%. So I'm not going to wait until you develop diabetes, which is what they usually recommend. I'm going to start to say, hey, you're at 88, you're at 89. I do the calculation in front of them and I say, hey, we got to look at what is optimal for you. What is the thing that's optimal for most people? And what can we do to get things moving? Most of these are things we're going to monitor over time. So I really like, rather than just a fasting blood sugar, I really love to do that continuous glucose monitor where we're watching people move. There are other metrics that we use that I'm sure everybody's familiar with that we use that are going to monitor things over time. And it's going to give me a better idea of, rather than scoring you good or bad, that this is, where are we going? what is affecting this and how do we move? So the other thing my staff were just talking about this morning, we were talking about how you prepare. So we go through their labs ahead of the appointment visit. All of us will. And then we have a plan in our minds about, oh my gosh, look at this thing and this thing. I bet they're doing that and the other thing, especially if they're patients we know well. And so we'll make a plan and the patient will come in and we'll say, hey, your CRP is high or your TNF alpha or your whatever the other labs that we're doing. And then the patient tells us a story that's completely different. Oh my gosh, my mother-in-law just died and we had this whole thing that happened. And now that explains all the things. So you had this big, long plan of what you were going to do with your client and how you're going to counsel them. And then now you have to redo your entire thing so this is a collaboration with the client. It is an optimization way so I love the word dashboard. We talked about using that before, but sort of thinking about how do we optimize you based on what's happening in your life right now? And is there additional investigation that we need to do? So let's say your blood sugar is high. Great. Are there things we need to do to move the needle in a different direction? Is this a primary mitochondrial problem? Is this a primary diet problem? Are we dealing with someone whose adrenals are in overdrive so the blood sugar is high? Are we over treating them with a couple of the peptides that we know will raise their levels of glucose? So there's so many factors that go into play, and this is not a one-off signal that your hemoglobin A1C is above 6 and now you fail. So keep those in mind that this is not a scorecard. This is a dashboard that requires continued investigation and lots of modification from various points.
I love this. This is this ongoing dialogue that you have with your provider where you're setting these goals. Leonard, you talked about it. I mean, a bunch. We've had conversations a bunch about the notion of this ongoing dialogue. Christy, we've talked about it. Craig, we've talked about it. It's one of those things where it's like, you want to be working on what's next. I love what Leonard says. Hey, if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, it's probably you're not on the right path. Excuse me. So, okay, cool. But let's break this up and let's talk with Frank. What you and Leonard are doing at NUHX is so cool. That pre-conference day, I was blown away. My son was there and he was like, Dad, this is the coolest stuff ever. I can't believe this. It was just so great. And so tell us about what's going on with NUHX and how you're using those tools in a way that help a patient at a totally different level.
Oh, for sure. Leonard is really the big specialist at NUHX, but I can give you overload a little bit about what we do, but it's for us, it's our approach to longevity assessment. How do we leverage different assessment tools to provide what we think is a journey to longevity medicine, right? So one of the biggest thing that we have is, we have at the core of it our pharmacist, and what they do is they provide a lot of guidance for patient once we receive a lot of the data from all the assessments that we do. We partner with many different companies. The first one that helped us with this was Pinoy, where we're leveraging VO2 Max to create a roadmap, right, for patients who understand things like, their mitochondrial flexibility, understand how GLP-1s are working for, how the muscles are working towards, towards their goals. We brought in Dexa scans in there as well, just to give a better visibility on visceral fat content, muscle mass content, and how to, bring that information with the VO2 Max and provide them even better clarity of what's going on, right? Then we had other tools. We have an awesome machine now, right, called OxFit, that, basically provide exercise, to this patient, more precision exercise to this patient. So we're trying to close the loop with giving assessments and provide and prescribe exercise really at the end of the day. There's more there because we're actually working in collaboration with prescribers. The key is to leverage our relationship with doctors to help them gain even more data, to help them with with better quality counseling for the patients. So it's an awesome thing that we're doing. We're partnering with even more and more companies. There's a lot of excitement there. So it's fun. It's fun. And as you saw when you came in at the pre-conference, it's not a very it's always changing, and that's what we like about it. There's really not one data that gives you all the answer. It's always constantly changing. We're learning something new each day. There's biomarkers are changing, and I can't wait to talk about that. The one size fit all model is gone. There's so many different ways to check biomarkers. There's so many ways to interact with labs, bring genomics into it, and add everything together with AI, and then just kind of blow people's mind in there too. So, that's what we do at NUHX.
Yeah, what I love about that is it's just such a next level, right? It kind of kills the noise of all these devices. I'm not saying these devices are bad, and I certainly use it for, tracking my workouts, tracking my steps, my stand. Obviously I have a standing desk and have it for a reason, because I want to stand for a certain amount of the day. So I'm not saying these things are bad. Personally, I like them, but I think you have to get it to a point and sort of understand, are they really useful or not? It's really cool what you and Leonard are doing at NUHX. Leonard, we're going to come back to you and at the end of and have you kind of wrap all of this up. So it'll be really cool to hear more about that. All right. Christy, I remember the day that you said we need to have a real heart-to-heart, right? About where my insulin sensitivity was. And I think that it's interesting when you really take a look at those labs and you're able to communicate that sort of information to someone and be able to tell them, hey, this is what you need to do. So the metrics are super important. And I'd love to hear from you, I've lived it, but I'd love to hear from you, like how you approach that in your mind. How are you going to actually talk to a patient about labs and different ways of tracking things as someone who's so into fitness as you are?
Yeah, I think the first thing that for us and for myself is, you have to ask some very powerful, directed questions at first. And, kind of basically we'll ask, what do you want to achieve with your health? And then we follow up with, what does success mean to you? And what does that look like? Because I think you have to understand, for instance, an insulin or albumin or, the ratios with CBCs and the they don't they don't excite a lot of patients. You have to kind of come to where they're at and understand what they're wanting to achieve. Some people, it's just simply they want to walk through their day without pain, or they want to sleep better, or they want to be able to have enough energy to enjoy their kids more, or literally, sadly, some of the elderly population that we see, as far just the ability to go from the floor to standing, which so anyway, so we start very basic there, but I think yes, we do some lab testing at first, but I'm not a heavy lab tester. I mean, if a patient isn't responding the way I think they should, yes, we can add more testing as far as with prodromal or, GI mapping or, genomics, anything we might need in that sense. But you can't forget, what does a person's sleep look like? What does their daily movement look like? What does food look like to them? And then there's stress management, because sometimes that's all you need to fix. I mean, they're not this magical button that we have. I mean, it's literally nothing fancy about it. It's you have to have those basic pillars. Then you can start layering it up and really start working on optimizing their health for longevity.
So true. Gosh, I've learned so much from you guys in such a short period of time, relatively speaking. Well, Leonard, let's hear your take on this whole thing.
Well, I think that the one of the most important things I see moving forward in all of medicine, not even just longevity medicine, is how great the medical practitioners have to be at assessing and identifying risk. With all the tools that we have and the dashboards that you guys are talking about, we're just way better. We have more information on how we can identify risk earlier and earlier in people and be able to intervene on that. And that's, me as a pharmacist, I've always been focused on biochemistry and medications and mechanisms of action, side effects. But even for me, this is something that I'm paying much more closer attention to, is all these diagnostics, these dashboards, these metrics, and what they mean, and what they mean over time, and how we can use these to initiate therapy, but also pivot therapy to see how what we're doing is actually working. And so you can get really lost in this, right? There are so many biomarkers that you can look at. So there is so much noise compared to signal. So I think for patients, the thing that they may struggle with, and even doctors, what they need to be focused on is identifying what that signal is versus noise. And so with NUHX, that's why we started off very basic, and we have plans to get a little bit more complex over time, but we wanted to get the basics down really, really well. And so we found that things like body composition, VO2 max testing, strength, and some very basic biomarkers, we can do so much there. And just being great at understanding what those things mean for the patient, like in the moment, but also what it means for them, their lifespan. Like, what does this say about their risk? Like, how can we prioritize how they exercise, or what peptides they use, or what nutrition they have? And so I think that anybody getting into this space or being overwhelmed, I think you have to first for yourself is prioritize like what your main goal is. And then once you prioritize what your main goal is, then you can work on just maybe the 5 top biomarkers that you want to actually make an impact on. And so I think that this is a fun place to be, because you can get very foundational, but there's so much room to grow, right? Once you have those foundational biomarkers of what you're looking at and how you're assessing them and how you're changing over time, then you can start getting into more fancier stuff like metabolomics and genomics and epigenetics and the all the stuff we have for preventative cardiology. You can that's what gets me excited about this field, is that I don't feel like I'm ever going to know everything. There's so much room to expand and know. And sometimes it's even with a very basic biomarker, right? Like looking at our recent conference, we were talking about this big risk with Lp(a) that everybody's looking at. And then this new study comes out in 2025 saying, hey, if you have that elevated, but you have low visceral fat, you actually don't have that amplified risk. And so here we are going back to a very basic biomarker of visceral fat and decreasing that. And we can make a big, big change in someone's life and someone's risk profile by looking at that. So it's a really fun game to play with, but it could get overwhelming. But that's why at NUHX, we're starting with the basics. And that's a lot of fun, and there's a lot to do there.
Yeah, it's just so cool. I mean, I was so impressed by that. And I think at the end of the day, now speaking to the patient side, Craig, let's turn this into action and really talk about what you're doing, because you have a Pinoe. Mm-hmm. And I know everybody here has a bunch of different types of equipment that they use in their practice, but how are you putting these a dashboard into action in your practice?
A longevity dashboard for me is really about, it's not about just a slew of numbers and statistics that people are following on some sort of technology. It's really about the few items that are going to correspond to something that we can measurably change, and that has to be actionable, right? So if the metric is not going to correspond to a change in our behavior, then it's really not worthwhile to incorporate that sort of thing on our dashboard. And so for me, it's all about simplicity. What can we monitor that really will promote some new progression of somebody's health down the road? Some examples that we utilize a lot in my practice, we're looking at fasting insulin. We're evaluating that in the context of meal timing, nutrition timing, postprandial activity and exercise. We're also looking at carbohydrate load and the nutrients that somebody's taking in. We're looking at an individual's HRV. We know that HRV is highly variable from person to person. But how is somebody sleeping? Are they hitting their 40% restorative sleep metric that qualifies improvements in recovery, and also is going to be associated with improvements in their HRV? VO2 max, you talked about Pinoe. Yes. So we want, somebody to have a good VO2 max on average, 40 to 45 milliliters per kilogram per minute, and their VO2 max is sort of a good marker, and that's going to decline, per somebody's age. But the goal is really to have clarity around these things, not just a whole bunch of numbers that people are just following willy-nilly. And the reason that's so important is because if, say, somebody takes a biologic signal, maybe that biologic signal is their HRV or their fasting insulin. If they implement 5 changes, and then over a 2 to 4 week time span, they're noticing that that biologic signal is improved on the next assessment, they may not know which to attribute that to, which lever it was that they pulled that actually brought about that change. So we want to make simple and slight trajectory adjustments that we can clearly define. This is what caused this to improve. And so, continuous tracking surrounding sleep, HRV, activity levels, these are the things that we're following regularly in the practice, again, for the purpose of clarity. And once somebody has a dashboard that is standardized across a population, at that point in time, we're really able to assess disease risk long before somebody develops diabetes or cardiovascular disease or dementia. And, we can be proactive as opposed to reactive. So that's really what it's about for me here at Remedy.
Craig, are you guys using those metrics practice wide? Meaning, are you monitoring what interventions make a difference in your entire practice in addition to for the individual?
Yeah, absolutely. And some things, we know just at baseline are going to significantly improve outcomes for patients. So, for example, people that are seeing their HRV decline by 5 or 7 points on a consistent basis, a lot of times they're, getting to bed late, they're waking up early, they're not getting that restorative sleep. People who are eating after 7 p.m., they're taking, a high caloric load after 7 p.m., they're not mobile after a meal. These are the people that we're seeing, with their insulin levels that are, suboptimal. So, yes, we're looking at those things across the board in patients. And then virtually everybody in my practice who is able to exert themselves is participating in PNOE metabolic breath analysis. And this is key, right, for their VO2 max testing. And as we talked about in the first episode, ideally, we're, measuring this quarterly.
So it sounds to me like one of the things that's a common theme here is keeping it simple, right? It sounds like everybody's trying to just narrow it down into the things that we need in order to get the patient where they need to go. And if you're a provider, I think that's instructive. If you're thinking about getting into the field of longevity or cellular medicine, I think there's a lot to learn here from this group. I think that's pretty clear.
Well, when you're thinking about your dashboard, I think about is this metric? These things are things I learned in medical school, in allopathic medical school, right? So is your metric going to be predictive of an outcome? So, for example, blood sugar, diabetes, right? Is there an outcome? And then, so this is what helps us decide, my team decide whether a metric goes on our dashboard. Does it have an outcome? The second thing is, are you able to is there anything that you can do to intervene? So, okay, let's say you have a genetic variant, but there's no treatment specifically for that variant. Well, then I don't really want to know that you have that variant because there's nothing we can do unless it's good to know for some reason, like a G6PD. That's a perfect example, actually. So, and then the third thing is, can we move the needle with some kind of intervention? So it's sort of the two sides of the coin. Is there no intervention? Then it's not really worth doing. And if we do an intervention, are we going to see a change? And what's the metric to measure there? So things are always coming on and off our panels as we try to see how we can. So like you guys were talking about, are we going to do a urine hormone test? Are we going to do a blood progesterone test? Are we going to do a blood, there's a million things that we do that are different, but these, is an FSH or an SHBG going to be valuable for us in assessing and so yes or no. And if in part of the decision making of whether it goes on the dashboard or not is, can I make a change that will be effectual? Because if not, it's not worth being there just to know it.
So once again, I think it's pretty important for everyone to really speak with your provider, feel comfortable with them, have them understand your goal, as Christy said, and then be in continuous communication about that, and also be truthful about what it is that you're doing. If you're doing something that's like, hey, I'm like Greg, hey, I'm eating ice cream at 7:00 at night every night. We're not going to get the right result, right? So, are there any other thoughts? Anyone want to wrap up with anything that's come up along the way as we've talked about all of this?
I think how Suzanne opened it up with that story about her patient and the Oura Ring is a really important one. My Oura Ring recently stopped working, and usually I run to go get another one. And I used to also always have this anxiety of if I went out for a run, I'd have to have a watch or something that was tracking my heart rate. And if I didn't track it, then it's like I didn't even exercise. It's like, why even go for a run if it's not being recorded somewhere? And recently I've just been going for a run, not looking at what my heart rate is. I can tell if I slept well or not. And I've been enjoying it actually lately. I do love data. I mean, I have NUHX. It's just all revolved around data. But I think sometimes it's nice to just take a break from it and also just, see your own intuition on how you feel, what your energy is, how you're sleeping. And I've actually been enjoying that, and that's okay too, even from somebody that loves health data. So that's an important thing to also think about as well.
Christy, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you track personally? Do you have a Whoop? Do you have an Oura Ring? Do you have a watch? Do you track any of that?
No. I don't. I will wear my Apple Watch when I'm out for a run, but I only do it because of the distance. I just want to know, okay, when I need to turn back around.
Yeah.
Because, being a long distance runner in college, I can run forever, but it's not what my body needs anymore. But no, so as far as like devices, how I approach it with patients is, wear it for a month, 2 months max. I mean, it's just to help you detect trends. And then take it off. I don't think there are absolutely your engineers. There's some people that just will not get off of them. They feel quote unquote safer. But no, I used to wear an Oura Ring years ago. I think I probably had but I hated waking up when it said I failed already. I'm like, screw you.
That's a really
I'm
good
like,
point.
whatever. And so, and I just, I think, knowing myself, knowing how I feel, like today, I'm, a little tired. So this morning was a little challenging at work, but it's justified. I just got back from a volleyball trip with my daughter. So, and I think my big thing is awareness always has to come before change. And if a patient needs that awareness, go for it. Now, when it becomes an obsession, that's when I will redirect them with myself, my health coach, our dietitian, our functional movement trainer. I mean, that's where I will try to help them start shifting away from the obsession of the data.
You know what's funny? I went to a conference not long ago. It was a tech conference in Vegas in healthcare, and I was sitting with this gentleman next to me, and this conference had a bunch of tech people there selling a lot of wearables. It was just wearables. Everything is wearable. That's where the money is going. Private equity money is going into it. And this guy from Oura Ring was talking, CEO, on main stage. And then this gentleman next to me is like, man, there's so many of them out there. We don't even know where to go anymore. And it's like, and he said something pretty profound. He said, these things, all it is, it's those wearable are just a behavioral mirror. And he said it to me. I was like, It's like, it's not a clinical statement. It's not a clinical instrument. It's just a behavioral mirror of yourself. And I think if people, prescribers and patient think about it just as a mirror image of a behavior and not a clinical instrument, I think that's where the win's going to be. You know what I mean? And the question is, is not what to track at the end of the day. Is like, what will you do differently based on what you see? And that's all. And to me, that's powerful. And when you go around and you see all those, dashboards, all those wearables everywhere, it is absolutely insane. And it's just overwhelming. But it's like, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do differently with it? And that's the key.
I think I agree with what everybody said, really great points. And especially what Leonard said about, the Oura Ring that failed and he took some time off. My after Calm or during Calm, actually, my Whoop ran out of battery. And for the past 2 weeks, I've just sort of let it be out of battery. And I just recharged it and started looking at the data again. And it does, paint a nice picture that is a mirror of our behavior. And so one of the things that I like to do is really sort of just kind of check in on my sleep scores when I wake up in the morning, maybe 5 days of the week, right? And if I see that my recovery is in the green, that my HRV is up from where it was previously, then this is a day that I know that I can put a little bit more effort into exertional training. If I'm seeing, the opposite, then maybe it's time to relax, get, the kids to bed early so that I myself can get into bed early and really get some restorative sleep. So I do love the data that they provide. But again, I think, simplicity at the end of the day and ultimately, using it as just another tool in our toolbox as opposed to something that we have to be heavily reliant upon.
Yep. We can definitely become obsessive with it. Well, hey guys, we need to move on and wrap up the episode, but I want to thank you all. It was really great to spend this time with you. Again, if you're new to Sell to Systems, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Also comment. We want to hear what you have to say, so please comment in the comment area so that we can answer any of those and also shape future episodes. We really appreciate your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you so much.